Hello and welcome once again to the Raging Introvert. We're going to wrap up our review of the Milwaukee Mythicist, MythCon, whatever debate. And we're going to focus kind of on helping Mr. Thomas Smith out here. He has a hard time understanding, I think, where Sargon is coming from and understanding the pushback he gets to some of his viewpoints. Because everyone lives in a bubble to some extent. And this is my bias showing, but I certainly think that the left and the social justice warriors in general are a much more insular bubble. And the fact that they attack so viciously and try to deplatform opposing views means that they don't have to critically analyze their own views. And they don't critically analyze the views of the opponents. You just say, you're racist, you're bigoted, and I'm not going to listen anymore. And I think that's why he doesn't comprehend some of the points Sargon's trying to make here. So we're going to start with, had quite a bit of discussion about feminism and intersectionality, and Thomas Smith gets very frustrated here and in his podcast and subsequent interviews, thinking that the audience is booing and jeering him for trying to come up with a simple definition for these terms, but that's not quite what's going on here. So we'll start with kind of a representative clip from the debate itself. They had been discussing feminism and intersectionality and just trying to define terms for the previous couple of minutes here. And this is kind of the culmination of that.
No, so I want to know if you actually can define intersectionality. Like, do you know what it is?
Yes,
no, you didn't.
I absolutely did.
You gave what your alarmist picture a straw man of it is.
Okay, so are you saying my definition is wrong?
Yes, absolutely.
How is it wrong?
It's not even a definition. You
So
just said it's Marxist
Stop wasting
and
everyone's
it seeks to control everybody. That's not a definition.
It's a Marxist system of like a dichotomy of oppressions. The idea that white men are oppressing black men, or men are oppressing women, straight people are oppressing gays, by the inherent existence of these people in society.
That's not the definition, but we'll go with that for now.
Absolutely is.
So make the counter argument.
Okay, so the definition, if anyone actually was interested, if you argue all day, you yell at feminists for a living, if you were interested in what the definition is, intersectionality just has to do with the different levels of identity we have and how they interact. So
to start with, part of the problem, Mr. Smith, and you probably aren't listening, but I'm going to pretend like you are anyway. Part of the problem is you ask for the definition of feminism, or you ask for the definition of intersectionality. These aren't like scientific level definitions where it's set in stone almost and very clearly defined. If you get 100 self-described feminists, get them into a room, and one at a time, separate from everybody else, they don't get to hear, ask them what is feminism, every one of those feminists will have a different definition. If you ask 100 social justice warriors or gender studies students what is intersectionality, and again, get their opinions, their definitions separately from anyone else, they're going to give you different definitions. So that's part of the problem with this debate, this discussion, is that there are no clearly defined terms. So when you ask Sargon to define it, he gives his definition, and you jump on him and saying, that's wrong, that's your definition. Well, there is no one true definition for these terms. So you have to give a little bit of leeway there, or, as you eventually did, give your own definition, and then at least you have a starting point between the two. Just as a example here, there was not a definition given for feminism, but sometimes people will say feminism is just equality. And that's what this is, dictionary.com. Feminism, the doctrine advocating social, political, and all other rights of women equal to those of men. Okay? If you look at egalitarianism, which a lot of anti-feminists will say, given as an example, egalitarianism, belief in the equality of all people, especially in political, social, or economic life. So the argument would be, why do we need feminism when it's theoretically, even according to this definition, they want women to have the same rights, social, political, and other rights as those of men, when egalitarianism is just saying all people should have equal rights, especially in political, social, or economic life. Either they're exactly the same thing, in which case they don't need to have two, we could just have one, or feminism is something else, something in addition to just advocating for equality between all humans. And just because we're here anyway, let's look at what intersectionality is actually defined as at dictionary.com. And again, if you go to different dictionaries, you'll get different definitions. But it says, noun, the theory that the overlap of various social identities, as race, gender, sexuality, and class, contributes to the specific type of systemic oppression and discrimination experienced by an individual. Or 2, the oppression and discrimination resulting from the overlap of an individual's various social identities. Now, both Mr. Smith and Sargon talked about the various identities and how it breaks people down into groups in their definitions. But only one of them, only Sargon, mentioned the systemic oppression and discrimination and how intersectionality focuses on that. Thomas didn't talk about that at all, and that's in both of these definitions. It's a critical part of intersectionality. It's not just identifying groups of people and how their backgrounds contribute to their beliefs and what they've turned out to be in life, but it also is very much about systemic oppression and power. And to leave that out is kind of disingenuous. Or ignorant of a core principle of intersectionality. But putting aside the issues with just a definition of terms, which is important, and again, I don't think Thomas Smith quite understands. He understands how important it is to clearly define terms. He just doesn't quite understand that these are not clearly defined terms, at least universally recognized, and other people will have different interpretations and definitions of these terms than he will, based off of their experience. So instead of being outraged or shocked or very combative, understand that these terms are not universal. Beyond that, the discussion then kind of goes more into the principles of the matter and what really does intersectionality mean. We got a definition, but what's the practical implication? What does it mean? And again, very different views, but also keep an eye on Thomas Smith. His definition didn't include anything about the whole system of oppression and hierarchy of oppression or power, whereas Sargon's discussion here does, which again matches up with at least a fairly neutral definition we have from dictionary.com.
Intersectionality makes us more individual because instead of looking at it does. How about, do you want me to explain it, or are you not interested?
I'm genuinely curious.
So instead of being men versus women, instead of being black versus white, which you wouldn't agree with, you don't like that. You don't you don't like, let's identify let's just pick one part of you and let's just identify you as that. You agree, right?
Yeah,
you don't like that.
But carry on.
Intersectionality allows us to say men have different experiences than women. Black people have different experiences than white people.
I can do that without intersectionality.
Black women have different experiences than white women.
Maybe.
Latino women have different experiences than black women. Poor white women have different experiences than black women. So that's intersectionality. I just gave you what intersectionality is that allows you to break down identities in a more dynamic way rather than the straw man you argue against, which is, oh, men, women, and they just want to isolate you to an identity.
Are you listening to yourself? You are collectivizing all of these people.
No, I'm doing the opposite.
You're saying it's individualism?
No, I'm doing the opposite.
It's not. It's the antithesis of individualism.
It's literally the opposite of what you just said. It's allowing people's identity to be multifaceted. It's allowing socioeconomic status to be part of it. It's allowing race to be part of it. It's allowing gender to be part of it.
You're categorizing them into classes, Thomas.
Yeah.
That's collectivism. That's not individualism.
But what I'm saying...
Now again, personal bias certainly may impact my judgment, but to me, it certainly seems Sargon has a better understanding of both sides of the issue, and he just believes in the one side, supports it. Whereas Thomas Smith, he understands his view, but it seems alien. He can't even comprehend Sargon's view of things. Now I can kind of see where Tom Smith's coming from. He's saying, look, we have all of humanity. All of humanity is kind of a broad term, if we're trying to get an idea of what people have experienced or their oppression or whatever, it makes sense to break them down into groups to try to, it's easier to categorize things. So all men and all women. Okay, but men and women probably have different life experiences. But all men aren't the same. So white men will have different experiences than black men. And then a poor black man will have different experiences than a rich black man. And a poor black man from a single parent household will have different experiences than a poor black man from a two-parent household, or two homosexual parents. Yes. If you eventually broke it all the way down, you would get to the individuals. And that's where Sargon's, I think, coming from more. Just because you make more groups, you're still collectivizing people, not treating them as individuals. And what the bottom line really should be is, what's the point of breaking people up into the groups? To understand their life experiences. The assumption might be a poor black person has faced police discrimination or has been hassled by the police more. Maybe instead of doing it by race, gender, sexuality, whatever, just a rich person, a rich white man could have been unjustly harassed by the police. You don't know. So why don't we ask the questions and look for the actual root of whatever we're looking for, as opposed to making these general blanket statements that, in my opinion, and in Sargon's too, distract from the issue at hand, and instead start awarding points, and then ultimately assuming people of certain classes have had experiences others have not, that they may not have, and then treating them as such. As we'll see hear in this clip from Thomas Smith's podcast shortly after this event, he doesn't understand that the audience is upset and they're booing him because they don't agree with his ideas. He thinks it's because they don't want to define a term, or they don't like his definition.
When I told him he hadn't defined intersectionality, and I said, let me just define it. I said, intersectionality is such and such, and it actually makes you more individual than second wave feminism. And at which point I was booed beyond belief. I was interrupted and booed to where I couldn't even define a word. They were booing my attempt to define my terms.
If you listen to the clip, that wasn't what they were booing. They were booing after Sargon said that was the exact opposite, and it was not about individualism. It was about collectivism, and such a stupid definition he couldn't, or analysis, he couldn't believe Thomas was making it. And Thomas saying, no, putting people in these groups does make them more individual. It had nothing to do with the definition itself, because it had been defined. It was more about the analysis and what it actually meant. And again, part of the problem is I think Thomas Smith doesn't understand the opposing view very in depth. This is a clip from his podcast as well. It's talking about when in the debate they got to the Black Lives Matter portion. Not related to the intersectionality directly, but it shows how he doesn't understand the opposing viewpoint.
Research on it, and I'm going to get to Black Lives Matter because I know I have good data on this. I'd done a lot of research. I had great data. So I asked him if he supported it, and he said, no, it's a collectivist group, something. And so...
So, yeah, right there, he already has in his mind, look, Sargon doesn't understand, he doesn't care, he blah, 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 something. He doesn't understand the opposing argument, doesn't care, is not intellectually curious. And, you can justify that however you want, but if you want to have a reasonable debate and refute points, you have to fully understand the opposing person's view. Now, Sargon, if you listen to the debate, goes further. Not only does he understand Thomas Smith's debate, but he asserts that he knows it better than Thomas Smith, or at least knows the underlying factors, by saying things are viewed from a Marxist lens or totalitarian, calling Thomas Smith a Marxist, which Thomas Smith says he is not, and Sargon saying, well, you don't know it, but you are. You're supporting Marxist ideals. That may be considered a little bit too far, but Sargon at least has a very strong understanding of Thomas Smith's viewpoints, the history behind them, and the more depth analysis. And I think this is part of the goal, or maybe it reveals the goal, this lack of intellectual curiosity in the opposing view, because there is no desire to have an actual authentic debate, because I don't think it's an even playing field. The social justice warriors are at a severe disadvantage, and so instead of having a debate and understanding the opposing view and trying to refute it, they just use emotion and outrage as a cudgel and try to shut down debate and shut down discussion. This clip's from the second podcast he had after the event, where he's talking with Dr. Christy Winters, and they're talking about, in a debate, they talk about Kekistan. So she gives a little clip here, and it shows just I don't care. There's nuance, there's debating points, there's something behind this, but I don't really care. That's not my point. My point is control, basically.
Some critics, I guess, who would say that I need to understand the Kekistani world better, and I need to really get into this ideology and understand the difference between people who follow Armored Skeptic and Shoe on Head and Carl, and the differences between them. I'm like, you know what? I don't care.
Yeah.
That's not my goal here. My goal here isn't to understand the ideological differences between different shitlords. My goal is to make sure that whenever someone brings up bringing Carl Benjamin to an American atheist skeptic conference, people pull out that video of you and him on stage, and in a minute they'll go, no.
And there it is. It's not about understanding their side so you can refute them. It's just about shutting things down. I want control. I don't want those ideas to be heard, and I want to make things a big enough shit show so I can make a big stink and try to deplatform and shut people down. And that makes it very difficult to have a legitimate discussion. So not only definition of terms, but also understanding all points of discussion around a topic. There's a lack, or there is no, intellectual curiosity on the left, especially with the social justice warriors. There's just righteous indignation because they've already drunk the Kool-Aid. They call themselves skeptics. These are supposed to be the atheist community, but there is a faith here that they fully believe, and no amount of data or logic that goes against their belief will be tolerated. It'll just be ignored. And don't even care about it. The other major point I think I would talk and just finish up with is emotion and anger. Thomas Smith, you could see throughout the clips here, is very agitated, very upset, and he loses cool very quickly. And in his podcast afterwards, several of them he talks about. He beats himself up. I think I mentioned in the previous discussion, he moves all over the place, beats himself up. Christy Winters says it's okay. He talks about a study and scientific research showing that that emotion is important to intellectual processes. Dude, calm down. There's nothing wrong with emotion, and people on the right, whether they're anti-SJWs, they're just conservatives, they're libertarians, no one, at least no one serious, will say emotion is in and of itself a bad thing. And I think, I can only speak for myself, but a lack of emotion, a complete lack of emotion, is certainly a bad thing. Like most things in life, you're looking for a balance. You mentioned in your podcast, episode 82 down here, that because of your anger and shock, you missed some points, didn't say some things correctly. So right off the bat, you admitted that your emotions hindered you in this discussion. That's a legitimate criticism. So when people say emotions hurt you in the discussion, well, you admitted it. No one is saying that emotion is necessarily in of itself a bad thing, but it is important not only to keep it level so it doesn't control you and distract from your logical processes, but let's look at this part. So this clip is towards the end of their discussion, I believe, on Sargon's tweet to the MP of British Parliament talking about I wouldn't even rape you. And we'll see the difference and how the moral outrage kicks in.
This is the fundamental disconnect we have.
Damn right.
This is the reason why you have two extremely polarized groups of people. A group of people who are cheering, saying, I wouldn't even rape you, to a victim of sexual assault. You have those people, deplorables, and then you have people who understand. You have people who are sensitive to the idea that maybe we shouldn't tell people, I wouldn't even rape you. Maybe we shouldn't threaten people online in that way and bully them in that way.
It's not a threat, but should we let the preacher carry on? Sorry, tell us what we should and shouldn't do.
Let's go to your next quote. So
No, let's skip the quotes, right? Because I'm literally just going to answer every single one of these.
From the video.
I don't care about your opinion on this, Thomas.
From the video,
I don't
it's
care.
called Feminism is a Mental Illness.
Care,
Maybe these
Thomas.
people care.
I don't care. I'm not going to answer it. I'm being interviewed. I'm here to discuss principle with you. I don't care about your moral outrage.
I don't care about you wanting to discuss principle, so let's talk about this. So now we're at a don't care off. Now we both equally don't care. So let's get to my question.
I'm not morally outraged.
Your video, Feminism is a Mental Illness.
So here's really where the problem between these two, and again, the understanding on both sides comes in. Moral outrage or finding this the whole topic or actions of Sargon disgusting and beyond the pale doesn't further anything when you're discussing principles and the actual foundations of these positions. Thomas Smith, again, whether it's because of his liberal bubble and upbringing in that SJW world, he keeps coming at it from and trying to bring it to the audience, and he's gotten frustrated with the audience. He's trying to shame them by calling them deplorables and saying this is the difference between us, the good people who understand that this is a wrong thing to do, and you guys who are deplorables and horrible. He's not discussing about what's wrong with it. Instead of just saying it's outrageous and wrong, explain why it's wrong. I mean, you already have strong feelings about it. It should be pretty obvious to you. And I know you might be thinking in your head, well, it is obvious, and anyone who can't see it is a monster and is not worth my time. That's part of the point of these debates and discussions. It A, may not be obvious to people, and B, it's still challenging your mental faculties to explain. Sometimes when you explain your beliefs and feelings, you reveal other things about it you hadn't understood before. And fine, this is a chance to make Sargon look like an ignorant fool in front of a large audience. That was your point. You said in your podcast you didn't want Sargon to go unchallenged. Just saying you're a monster is not challenging him. It's just showing moral outrage and doesn't get us anywhere. And Sargon, as he's trying to say here and explain it to you, he could say, later in this discussion, you're talking about how, well, race should be a factor in hiring. It shouldn't be the main thing, but, if everything else is equal, we should give it to the more, the minority candidate, whatever that may happen to be. And Sargon could rightly come back and say, you're racist, that's outrageous, how dare you discriminate based off of race, that's morally reprehensible. Okay, he could say he's outraged, but he should instead just lay out the claim and the foundation for the argument and logically, or using data or whatever, reveal why your position is wrong, as opposed to just saying it's wrong and you're a horrible human being. This next clip is kind of an example of the extreme of just a downward spiral of emotional outrage over what should be a relatively, I don't want to say petty issue, but this is from a podcast with Thomas Smith. He's got some other friend of his, I guess, Eli Bosnick, and they're talking about the tweet. And the first, 10, 15 minutes is all about emotions and how did you feel and what did you think when the audience shared this horrible tweet. And the people from the organization that ran the event they're kind of waffling and hedging. They're not really being clear, not making a clear statement one way or the other, which is getting this guy upset. And it's a little long, but let's listen to this.
I know I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record here, but I am aghast at the lack of empathy in both of your answers. Look, I understand you're standing by your convention, but I asked you a simple question about what it felt like to watch your audience cheer, mocking a sexual assault victim, and your answer was, I should have gotten the question.
My answer is judge slowly.
That is
I think that you could actually
that is a reprehensible answer. Let me tell you how I felt. Okay, let me tell you how I felt. Okay.
Now at this point, I was kind of hoping he'd do some kind of Sargon's thing and respond with "I don't care" or "I don't care how you felt." And I'm not an internet meme guy, but I think at that point something like
"Smoke weed every day."
And then the sunglasses would slowly descend on his face, even though it's a podcast and you couldn't see them.
Because that is reprehensible, and I think it is the basis for what this conversation really needs to be, right? Because when I saw that video clip,
and that's an important point there too. That is not what the basis for the discussion should be. How morally outraged I was, or how offensive I found that, and how disgusting. Look, just discuss the topic at hand. I don't need to hear your feelings and how much it hurt you. And you're going to see this guy. It drove him. You know, he's probably on the floor in his shower with the water running, just whimpering and crying. I'm curious how he handles watching the news and seeing that people died in the hurricane that hit Puerto Rico, or watching what happens in Darfur, or seeing ISIS. I've watched the video, and it's kind of disturbing. I have military experience, and these things kind of are important to know. Watching people be beheaded with a knife. I remember watching a video where Chechen rebels captured a Russian soldier and slit his throat, and it was horrific. Having him emotionally react like this to Sargon, someone reading Sargon's tweet and the audience cheering, not cheering necessarily, sending harassing tweets to member of parliament, but he had a reason. He had a point behind it. I don't know if they were cheering because he supported his point, because he was sticking to his guns and not backing down. It could have been for a host of reasons. But this guy is off the deep end.
I was standing, getting ready for a platinum night, right? I was getting ready for a platinum night and my show in Salt Lake City, hanging out with my buddies, living on my side of atheism. And I froze in horror and shame at the idea that a convention with the label that I fight for, that a convention with the title of atheism, that a convention that claims to be secular, would have an audience cheer that poison. And the thought of all of the sexual assault, and I'm sorry for getting emotional about this, and I know your audience will call this a win, but the thought of the sexual assault survivors.
We're on your podcast, remember? It's
What?
not our audience. It's not our audience. It's your audience. We're coming on your podcast.
The thought of a sexual assault survivor sitting at home and thinking that this is what the community thinks of their pain, that this is what the community feels about them. I was ashamed to call myself an atheist. I have fought for atheism since I was 19 years old. I fight the creeping theocracy that covers this fucking country every day. I make 9-to-5 jobs look easy, and I was ashamed.
That's an awful lot of virtue signaling there. He works hard. He was ashamed. They should be shamed. In fact, if you listen to this podcast, they're trying to bully these guys into apologizing and basically bowing down and begging forgiveness from the social justice warrior gods. And if they would bow down and apologize and say how wrong they were, they would be granted absolution. They would be cleansed and purified and welcomed back into the fold.
Ashamed of myself, and I thought of my father, who's no longer with us, and I thought, I'm just the bully he asked me not to be.
Well, that is actually true. You guys are complete bullies, and I'm sorry you have these feelings for your father. I'm sure he loved you, even though he may have been critical of you at times. But yes, you and the social justice warriors are absolutely bullies, trying to force people into compliance with your viewpoint, and no deviation is allowed whatsoever.
That's what I felt. And I didn't put on the convention. I was fucking appalled. And I'm appalled for you.
You know you're a hardcore social justice warrior when you're willing to take on the cross of oppression for other people as well. These people, Christ died for the sinners. For the atheist community, these people who don't support social justice, they know not what they do, and I will take their cross of ignorance and oppression and bear it for them.
Okay, there's a person. Okay, there's a.
I don't know. The whole podcast is. I have to say that this podcast is not as enjoyable as the rest. It's kind of a shit show, and it descends into madness, and they interrupt each other. And again, the social justice side is a lot of moral outrage posturing, and the event coordinators. They stand up a couple times, but they're in a tough position too because they don't want to alienate all their, a future audience and future members. So they're at a disadvantage. But they do make a point that I guess as Eli Guy must have a podcast or another show where they routinely joke about some pedophile character who molests children, and the guys from Mythicist, Dimitri and Brian, kind of bring that up. And, it's not the same. They don't want to talk about it as much. This outrage thing can go anywhere, can be raised for anything. And ultimately, it's not an argument or a refutation. Yes, if someone's going to go up there and be a 9/11 truther, and I knew someone who died in 9/11. That's the other thing, too. It's kind of a scale of oppression, too, with intersectionality, because the oppression stuff and the outrage, it allows you to show that you're outraged by something, kind of shows that you're oppressed, because they keep bringing up this tweet, right? She's a woman. It's more outrageous that it was a woman. And it's a woman who is a victim of sexual assault. So that puts her up on a pedestal. And I was hurt and offended because my father said some mean things. Maybe he was abusive, maybe he was just verbally abusive, or maybe he just made him have bad feelings. But that he is impacted and traumatized more by this than a normal person would be. So you should take his words more seriously, and he can use it as a cudgel and say, you were a horrible person, this was a terrible thing to do, and you need to apologize, or I was ashamed, I don't want atheists or anyone in this community to support you in the future. That doesn't further the argument of the fundamentals at all. And maybe it's hard to get that across to somebody who's morally outraged. Again, sure, you can think about all those people who may have been affected, but what if I put on a baking convention? I have a convention about baking, and lots of people come in, and then someone comes in, and one of the booths has peanuts, and their child died from a peanut allergy, and they're shocked because they didn't know that this baking convention would have peanuts in it, and it shocked them. And it's appalling that they would, we didn't put trigger warnings and peanut warnings at the front and didn't have it blasted all over our advertisements. And how dare you, whatever percent of the population, however millions of people have peanut allergies, and they were allowed at this booth without warnings. Look, it can go anywhere. Bottom line is, let's discuss the facts, and let's not forget that we're talking about human beings, and emotions do play a part. And I think in that clip, if I started it where I was hoping to, he mentioned he was shocked by the lack of empathy. And there's a couple clips throughout this, especially this podcast, where I talk about lack of empathy, and there's no empathy on the other side. The hosts and other people in the audience have empathy. If Sargon had got up and just started pummeling the crap out of Thomas Smith, beating him and physically hurt him, people would be shocked and appalled. I can watch movies where emotional things happen, and I feel for the characters it's happening to. And like I was talking about those horrible horrible things I've seen with Chechen rebels or ISIS, yeah, I felt terrible about that. I would never use it as a moral club or to try to prop myself up and make myself look better or more self-righteous as somebody else. That's not the point of it. And to say those people who did not react the way you wanted or as stridently as you want, that they have no emotion, no empathy, and basically implying that they're monsters or not human, is horrific. And it's strange, there's no objective truth to a lot of this, so there's no way to actually to prove that those guys are false, because there's no way to prove any of this. It's not a scientific endeavor. But I don't know, we've been rambling on long enough, and I've only got to 2 points, but the whole emotion thing and anger and outrage and moral justification and the definitions of intersectionality and how that worked with things and how Thomas Smith just didn't seem to understand where Sargon was coming from and how, yeah, I just wanted to highlight it, bring it up, and I don't know. It's kind of the end of this. I'll move back on to review. Although I have to admit, going through this Thomas Smith stuff, then I met Christy Winter, not me, but I mean, I'd never heard of Christy Winters before, and she's down here. I started looking more into her. There's quite a social justice warrior community I was unaware of, and just skimming through YouTube videos of all of them has been very enlightening. So I encourage you to do so as well.